Hi, and welcome back to our study of Philemon, no longer a slave. It is so good to see you. We're glad that you can join us this week online. Hope that you are being encouraged by the class. It's really tough to do a class online. I do thank you for the comments. There have been some comments and questions that have been posed. I'm going to address one here up front. To try to answer a question that was asked several weeks ago. So sorry for the delay. I'm actually recording these ahead of time. But I do appreciate the thought and the questions that are coming through and the feedback we're getting. Really appreciate that. And again, I hope this is encouraging to you. I've enjoyed studying this, and I hope that's coming through in these classes. One of the questions we received was, why did Paul send Onesimus back to his master? Wouldn't that be in direct violation of Deuteronomy? And the reference is to Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 15 and 16, that does talk about if a slave does come to you, to live with you, to be with you, don't send them back to their master. And I would answer with two thoughts. First is this: because of other comments earlier in the book of Deuteronomy, we can infer that this passage is talking about Hebrew people that had become slaves. Now, we're not necessarily told whether Onesimus is an Israelite or whether he is not. There was a mixture of both that were living in Colossae, so we really don't know. But if you go back and examine the scriptures that are talking about Hebrew slaves versus slaves taken from other nations, if you look, for example, at Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 46, you'll see that God was making sure to denote that no Israelite, including slaves, were to be oppressed or treated ruthlessly. And so we can infer that when he's saying, if someone comes to be with you as a slave, don't send them back to their master, might have been talking about an Israelite slave. The second thing we look at is that Paul sent Onesimus back to fulfill a specific purpose. Now, the first loophole that we might find and mention is this. Paul sent Onesimus back to Philemon, and he begged him to accept him back as a what? As a brother, not as a slave anymore. So we could say that technically he was sending back a brother, not a slave. But also, we look at how a change in social status can remove you from slavery. But not only that, Paul was changing something else about Onesimus. He's changing his purpose. He's changing his reason for living. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So keep that in the back of your mind. Our opening question for today, what I would like for you to do is to do a quick little research project. I'd like for you to get out your phone or get on your computer, whatever you're doing, and I'd like for you to look up what are the greatest gifts ever given. What are the greatest gifts ever given? Just take a few minutes, go search that, go look that up, and come on back and we'll talk about that. All right, so you probably found the Statue of Liberty, which was given by the citizens of France to the United States. Or maybe you found out about the Taj Mahal, which was built as a memorial to the wife of Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. You might also have seen that in 1975, Elvis Presley gave away 14 Cadillacs, and one of those was to a complete stranger. Or maybe you read about baseball legend Joe DiMaggio ordering 6 fresh-cut, long-stem roses to be sent 3 times a week to the love of his life, Marilyn Monroe, which is super sweet. But even sweeter when you realize that he had those roses sent to her 3 times a week for 20 years after she died. They were sent to her grave. Now, maybe for some of you, you're remembering a gift that you received. Maybe it was a pony or a purse. Maybe it was a rifle or a video game, something you'd been wanting for a really long time. But gifts don't have to be big to be special. My family has been so blessed by friends that randomly send cookies or invite our kids over to play with their kids or take us out for coffee. Those friends have found out one of the secrets of life. Life is sweeter when you're serving other people. And this leads us to today's main point. To escape slavery, Onesimus went from useless to useful. And you can write that in as your next point here. He went from being useless to useful. Now, the first thing we're going to do is to grab our green highlighter. Remember, this represents something that we can do or not do. In other words, what can I learn from this passage? So we're going to get our green highlighter, and we're going to go in and we're going to highlight verse 11. So let's go in here with our green highlighter. And highlight verse 11. Verse 11 says this: "Once he was useless to you, but now he is useful to both you and me." The root word we see here is the word that we see where it says useful and useless. It's from the same Greek root word, which is krestos, which is translated to be useful. Now, Paul was a wordsmith, and he proves it here by playing on this word. He says that formerly Onesimus was a krestos. He puts the letter A in front of that word. Now, we've borrowed this in our English language. When there is an A in front of another word, sometimes that means a particular thing. Now, what does that mean? For example, sometimes it doesn't mean anything because English is a weird language, but sometimes it means something else. Let me give you some examples. If you take the word theist, which means someone who believes in God, and you put an A in front of it and say atheist, what does that mean? Or atypical. Or let's say there's someone who's described as amoral. Or maybe someone says, I don't care to vote, I am apolitical. Now, in all those cases, in those words, it means none or no or without, or I believe not in that thing. Atheist, there's no God. I don't believe in a God. I'm apolitical. I don't care for politics. So in this case, Onesimus was referred to as akrestos. So we're going to take a note about that, and I would like for us to write in our Bible margins or in our notes the word akrestos. So we'll come up here and we'll write akrestos means useless. Akrestos means useless. Now, what does it mean to be useless? Have you ever felt useless? Have you ever called someone else useless? What kind of circumstances make you feel useless? Now, I'm going to see if we can put those questions over here beside me so that you can look at them and think about them. But I want you to answer those questions, pause here for a minute, and then come on back. I don't know about you, but I feel useless when I don't know how to help. Maybe there's a situation and I just don't know what the right thing is to do. Or maybe I don't have the power to help. I don't have the leverage to make something happen. I can't move a mountain in order for something else to take place. Or maybe I feel useless because there's someone else that can do the job better than me. There might be a number of ways that we feel useless, but I want us to differentiate from feeling useless and actually being useless. So under the word akrestos, let's go back in with our pens or pencils and let's write the following scriptures. I want you to write Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21, and James chapter 2, verses 14 through 20. So let's take a look at those and see what the Bible says about being useless. First of all, let's look at Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28. It says this: anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but they must work, doing something useful, there's the word, with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. The first way that we can be useless is when we steal from others. And think about all the ways that we can steal. Now, obviously, we can steal things from other people. That's the most obvious way that we can steal. But we can also steal joy from other people. We can also steal their time. We can steal from our employers by not working hard. The first thing we see here is that we can stop and take stock of the way that we treat others. Are we taking more than we are giving? If so, are we stealing? And do we need to start giving something back? That's the first way that we can be useless, is when we take more than we give. Let's look at the next verse. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, and he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you, and then who will get what you've prepared for yourself?" This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. The second way we can become useless is by hoarding, by keeping things just for ourselves. Jesus tells this story with a warning. Life is not about amassing stuff for yourself. Think about it this way. If you come to the end of your life and people just want your stuff when you die, then your death and not your life was the only useful thing that you had to offer. Or think about this. If people just want your stuff when you die, then you missed a chance to be generous while you were still alive. Are we people that are giving, or are we just people that are amassing all this stuff for us? And what is going to be the purpose of that when your life is done? We really need to think about all of our things, and is that useless or is it useful? Because those things should be in command of under our command instead of commanding us in what we do. So that's another way we can be useless, is when we hoard all of our things and we're not helping anyone else, but we're just amassing it for us. And now let's look at James chapter 2, verses 14 through 20. "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace,' keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there's one God? Good. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? There's our word again. And so the third way that we can be useless is by dreaming about helping others instead of doing it. This is probably the most frightening thought for most people to think about, because this is probably where most of us are. We're kind, we talk about helping others, we go to church, but is there proof that you are indeed a helper? I know whenever I look at all of these, I think this is the hardest one that I look at in my life. Am I someone that is genuinely a helper? I don't just talk about it. I don't just think about it. I don't just pray about it, but I actually do it. Am I a helper? Am I a giver? So Paul says that formerly Onesimus was akrestos, but Paul goes on and says that now Onesimus is eukrestos. Eukrestos. In Greek, EU is a positive prefix meaning good. So now not only is Onesimus useful, he is of good use. So again, let's take our pens or pencils and write in our notes or our margins, and let's write eukrestos. And you can write in there of good use or very useful. Of good use or very useful. Now, we often get it in our heads that we cannot be useful unless we have a certain skill set. But let's not confuse usefulness with the word talented. We often think that we cannot be useful because we don't have a lot of money. But let's not confuse usefulness with the word rich. We often think that we cannot be useful because we don't have a crowd of people that we can mobilize. But let's not confuse the word usefulness with the word popular. Onesimus had absolutely none of those things. Onesimus most likely owed Philemon something, maybe even stole from him. Onesimus had no influence and no talent to make history remember him. But Onesimus had two things that helped him become useful. One, he had the knowledge that he was a child of the king. Remember, when you're a child of the king, you have everything that you need. You lack nothing. When you're a child of the king, you have all the resources behind you to do whatever you need to do. You're not lacking anything. So that's the first thing that Onesimus had that made him useful, is he was a child of the king and he now had a family surrounding him. Remember Paul calling him my son in the faith. So he now has a family, he's got a father, he's the son of a king. He has everything that he needs. And number two, he allowed his heart to be changed by the love of Jesus Christ. When you let Jesus reign in your life, you start to look at his life because you want to be like him. And what you'll find is that his life was lived as a sacrifice for other people. And Jesus showed us that it doesn't take a lot to be useful. 5 loaves and 2 fish, that's enough. Forgiving a woman that everyone else hated, it costed him $0. Taking a little time to make children feel special. Eating a meal with a tax collector. In the end, see, everything was taken from Jesus. His dignity, his clothing, his friends, everything was taken. Ultimately, his life. What was the end thing that he had? A couple of nails and a cross. And yet, at the end, he still gave what he had left, and that was his life for you and for me. It doesn't take a lot for us to give. And if we're following Jesus and living life like him, we'll be useful because our life will be spent for other people. And at the end of our life, we may have nothing left because we've given it all away to bless others. And so what is the most useful thing at that point is our life, not our stuff. So to end this and kind of wrap this up, for discussion or for thought, I want you to think about this. What negative thoughts are holding you back from being more useful? And what is one thing that you can do for someone this week to be useful to them? I'll bet it will take less time and less effort than you think. It might even cost you absolutely nothing. If God can use a handful of fishermen to take his message to the whole world, if God can use a rich man that lost a slave to learn about God's love, if God can use an old man that was a prisoner to bring people together, if God can use a slave to take a few letters that we can read in our time and be encouraged by, and if he can use that slave to go back and to rejoin a church as a brother instead of a slave, then God can use you. You are not useless because you can be a child of the King. And you can have everything you need at your back to help you be useful to others. And we can be generous as our Father is generous. I hope that if you are a Christian, if you are a child of the King, that you're encouraged by this to know that you can be useful. And I hope that if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, that you would say, I want my life to be useful. This sounds interesting. Why did Jesus sacrifice his life? Why was he so giving? I hope you'll find someone to talk to about that. I hope that you'll study the scriptures and be able to talk. And if you need to call our church office again, we're more than happy to talk to you. We would love to hear from you. Now, next week, we're going to look at the fourth way that Onesimus leaves his life of slavery and how you can leave yours. We hope we'll see you next week.